Hey, this is Dave Parker for Breaking Audio. In this video, we're going to pick up where we left off last time, talking about drum loops, various ways we can recycle them in Ableton, a whole bunch of different things we can do to it. Part 2 of what's looking like a 3-part series. So if you like production tips in Ableton and Pro Tools, definitely subscribe to our channel and you won't miss anything. So let's get to it. All right, so in the last video, we ended with discussing generating MIDI from existing drum loops and applying some new sounds to it. So one thing I want to mention real quick along those lines is if you have Ableton Suite, you get access to a lot of downloaded content and in the packs. And there's a whole bunch of drum loops in here, but there's also MIDI loops. So what I've done with in my collections here with my color dots is I've organized all the MIDI drum loops that come with it. It took a little bit of time, but I went through. I talk about this in my one of my previous videos, and basically, what's cool about this, and in a similar way to stealing the MIDI from a existing drum loop, this is already MIDI. So what you can do with this kind of stuff is just kind of go through and one of two things. You either can say like, hey, that's kind of a cool drum kit that they're using, and generate your own pattern. Or what you can do is you can take the existing pattern and, because it's MIDI, easily tweak it and apply new sounds to it. So I could listen to this one and be like, I mean, that's got a neat sample in it and everything. I kind of like some of those sounds, we can pop it in here, have a quick look. If you drag it in the way I dragged it in, it'll bring the whole entire kit in with it as well. So you have your MIDI, and then you also have the drum kit that comes with it. So, you can pick and choose what you want from it. In this case, let's give it a listen. Cool, we're listening to it at a higher tempo. I can go through what I would do. I don't really like using these things straight up. I mean, this is kind of somebody else's work, really, so I might go and kind of like mute some of the samples here. Kind of locate them. We're at a higher tempo. So right, and then because it's MIDI, you can just go through and start like changing this stuff on the fly, or just completely swap the kit for a totally different kit and then start manipulating the pattern. Obviously, we're listening to this is a different tempo, but that's a real quick way to kind of get some ideas started. I found doing this was pretty, it's kind of inspirational. Again, I'm not going to like straight up rip anybody's drum loop, but I can find some inspiration in this in either the sounds or some of the patterns and whatnot, and kind of preview it with the music I might be creating really quickly, and then just get to work chopping it up and doing some other stuff. So one thing that we can do with drum loops, and even MIDI drum loops, that maybe kind of gets forgotten about from time to time, is using the groove pool. You can extract a groove from either an audio clip, an audio drum loop, or a MIDI. So I'll give you a quick overview of what this looks like. If we listen to a beat here. Right, so this beat has a little bit of feel to it, and that's what we're talking about when we talk about groove. So if you zoom in and look here, what's happening is, and this is pretty typical, the snare's a little bit back behind the beat, some of these hi-hats are a bit back behind the beat, there's even a snare in here that's ahead of the beat a little bit. So that's kind of the feel that we're going to look to extract. And we can take that feel, extract it, and apply it to something else. In this case, what we'll do is we'll apply it to a MIDI clip that's very quantized, is very straight. So in order to do this, we're going to come up here to our MIDI clip right here, this 103 Boston. We're going to right click, and then we're going to go down to extract groove. It's going to analyze it, extract, kind of like its own grid based off of like these transient points, if you see down here, right? So now it's living over here in our groove pool, and we can use that and apply it to something else. So if we go over here to this MIDI clip, let's just have a listen to it real quick. It's very straight, it's very quantized, everything is right to the grid. It's a little bit lifeless for us, so over here in this section, we're going to click on our groove, right? That's going to now become selectable in here. And then we're gonna apply its timing 100%. We're just gonna leave that all the way up right now. And there's some other settings here you can look at if you want to go do some more research on what groove does. And plenty of videos that'll explain some of these details. So we're just gonna go ahead and hit commit and see what happens. Now, if you saw that, all those little clips shifted a little bit. All those little MIDI notes shifted a little bit, right? So now it's attained some of the grooves, right? So the hat and the snare here are a little bit back behind where they were. So now we've got a little bit better feel. And it probably matches this one pretty well now. Right. So it's a nice way to get some, kind of like human-ish type feel. One thing I've noticed is that sometimes if you apply full timing, it can feel a little bit weird. If you have something that's like extra swingy, it can be a little bit weird. So it's kind of good to play with the amount that you put on that. But it's a nice way to, flavor something that's a little bit stagnant. Another thing we can do with some drum loops is something we might do to a let's say a real recorded drum kit, sound replacement or sound layering, right? So frequently people are using sampled snare drums on their their live drum kit and stuff to make it sound way beefier. But let's not forget, even if we're using loops, we can do the same thing, right? So one of my methods of doing that is, let's say we've got another drum loop here. Straightforward. Feels kind of nice, but maybe let's say, hey, like the hats are kind of bright, the kick is cool, the snare's a little dark, right? So what we could do is we could do what we did in an earlier video where we go down here and go convert drums to new MIDI track, which I've done here already. And we've gotten ourselves a new track here with all the MIDI notes. And I've gone ahead and muted the hat and the kick because what we want to do is I want to layer, in this particular case, I want to get a different snare. I'm going to layer it. I'm not going to completely sound replace. So let's see what happens when I do that. Without. Right, so now I've got a real bright snare. I guess that's what I was looking for. I'll show you an additional trick. What we can do with this, instead of cutting out and completely removing the existing snare, what's kind of nice, if we use a compressor on our original drum loop here, and side chain the input from our new snare, what we can do is we can duck the old snare a little bit and leave that new snare kind of popping up. So what that does is it kind of gives us a little bit of a smoother blend instead of just hacking out the old snare, So let's kind of listen to what that sounds like, the difference. This is without. So the snare is definitely bigger now that it's layered, but let's just kind of do a little bit more of a replace technique. And that's much tighter. So let's hear the difference one more time. Tighter. Bigger. So layered. And more of a replaced, but not totally replaced technique. So that's a handy trick, and you can do that with kick or anything. I tend to not try to put two kick drums or two snare drums exactly together on top of each other. They're too similar because you can get some weird phase canceling or whatnot. So that's something to keep in mind from working with drum loops. So this is going to get a little bit more complicated and involve a sampler. But another thing that's really fun to do to drum loops is to slice to a sampler or a drum rack in a variety of different ways. So let's take a look at two of those things real quick. We've got a drum loop here. Just that one. Now, there's two ways we can go about doing this. We've used this in the past, convert drums to MIDI rack or to MIDI track. But let's check this out. Slice to new MIDI track. And what that's going to do is that's actually going to slice the sample into pieces in different ways and load it into like a drum rack or a sampler or something. I'm going to kind of do both ways. There's a couple different ways we can do this. One way would be slice to transient, which will give us, in this case, 20 slices. And we're just going to go with whatever built-in preset it's going to give us here. What this is going to do is it's going to give us a new track with the drum beat sliced up in a drum rack, a whole bunch of different slices, and it's also going to give us a MIDI track. Now what that allows us to do is we can go back and we can reorganize some of these slices if we want to, or we can play the slices with a keyboard like I just did. And we can kind of reorganize. Yeah, we can come up with a new beat using the same sounds, using the same slices. So it's a little bit of like, it gives you typically some kind of glitchy results, but you can make some smooth stuff this way. My preferred method of doing this is actually to do it this way. Slice to new MIDI track, and then slice to a beat division. These seem to go together more fluidly. And less glitchy, and it's easier to play because you know that the region you're playing is a 16th note division rather than just a transient of some kind. You might have a small slice or a long slice. So now I have this, and I can kind of play it with my keyboard. One thing that I like to do that's kind of fun is if you go down, we'll grab the arpeggiator and slap it on. Oh, and by the way, you also get a MIDI clip, so you actually can play it just straight up. And that MIDI clip is easier to deal with since all the slices are now even. There's, typically quite a few of them, but now they're like in even amounts, so they're easier to deal with than just these transient bits that have a variety of sizes. So what I like to do is slap an arpeggiator on the thing and then hold down a series of notes, and I can kind of generate a new pattern this way fairly easily. Well, let's make a little modification. We're going to put the gate at 100%, and we're going to want to put the rate at 16 because we chopped in 16 slices. All right, 16th note slices. So now I can hold down different notes and trigger them back in different ways. Some of it's pretty wacky, but it is fun. And you get some interesting patterns if you hold down the right things. And there's a variety of arpeggiator styles you can play with as well. So that's kind of a fun thing to do to a drum loop. I'm going to actually come back to this later, and we're going to go a little bit deeper on this in the next video. So the last thing I'm going to talk about is clip automation and modulation. And this can be a pretty deep thing to dive into. So I'm going to kind of cover the key points here, and you'll get the idea. This is a pretty cool way of like mangling and just tweaking in general a drum loop. So if we look at this, go to the envelope pane here. If that's not visible, you can hit this little button down here. If we look at the clip, we get a couple of basic parameters, right? We'll kind of look at volume just to give you the idea. We can take a section and we can kind of reduce, it's behaving. We can reduce the area and kind of like, we can even mute a whole part if we want without actually editing it. We can draw in little volume fades and things like this and all sorts of stuff. We can get fancier and start applying LFO shapes and grab duplicate them out. We can do all sorts of zany stuff with it. The one thing that's new to 10 are these little tabs up here. See this region I have selected? These little tabs, and it will allow you to manipulate the modulation in a variety of ways. Now, there's some useful key commands. If you hold Option, it'll kind of allow you to do both top and bottom at the same time. You can even invert and do this kind of stuff. It'll grab all sorts of weird stuff. We can squish it all up, and then we can Command D, whatever, and like duplicate it out and kind of keep going and going and going. Shift will give you more accurate control, where Option will grab both the bottom and the top at the same time for you. So you can get really creative with this kind of stuff and do some weird stuff. I'm sure this doesn't really sound good. What have I done with this now? Oh yeah, it's just, useless nonsense. Let's just clear all that out. So that's kind of the idea, but the best way to go about doing this for me is I start throwing plugins down here on the chain, right? So I give myself a frequency shifter and a utility. A utility is something that I use frequently when automating volume. I'll automate the gain knob instead of the volume fader on the channel itself. So if we go back to the clip here, what do we find? If we have automation for the clip or the mixer, frequency shifter as well, and this can get pretty strange if we select something like, Let's see, what do we want to mess with here? Oh, just the frequency. Let's just do that. That's pretty straightforward. Frequency, yeah, coarse would be what we want to mess with. And let's give ourselves a neat little sine wave and duplicate it out. And let's kind of like decrease the insanity a little bit. Still fairly insane. It was a pretty crazy thing to use here. I've gone beyond my region. That's okay. Let's kind of manipulate it further. Maybe we can try. Just inverting and making it intensify the whole thing. Let's make it more intense as it goes. Let's just make it go up and up and up and up and up and up. Wow, fancy. So totally silliness, but you get the idea. You can pretty much do any parameter. I can do the whole utility, right? Maybe we'll do the gain. Utility. When you click on one of these knobs, it is then what appears in here. So it's a kind of a shortcut to finding what it is you want to do. So we can do this kind of a thing. Why don't we give ourselves a triangle, descending volume. Oh yeah, craziness. Yes, it is now peaking like crazy. Total awfulness. So, I'm mostly making a mess right now, but you can understand that, you throw in your favorite plugins and you start automating parameters and spend a little bit more time than I just did, and you can come up with some really cool stuff. I was just throwing some random nonsense at the wall, but it's a really useful thing, and it's really deep. You can get lost in that for, hours and hours and hours. Just keep stacking plugins up. And usually what I find is like the more minor tweaks, the better, because as you can see, unless you're going for totally nuts, if you're going for if you want to be Richard Devine, you could see with what I just did that there's a pretty quick path to, doing some sonic madness very easily, and also ending up with automation that's almost beyond what you can keep track of in your mind. But that's what makes it fun. So tune in next time. We're gonna go deeper on some more of that kind of glitchy, drum type, mangling. And I think that'll be kind of fun. All right. I'll talk to you soon. Peace out.